to another episode of PropTech Talks. We have, which I'm now allowed to say, Rich from SEGRO. Rich, great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. Well, let's jump right into it. You've got an interesting background as a real estate executive, and I'd love to go into it a little bit. Obviously, the sector is going through a transformation at the moment, so that's really what we're going to be talking about. But before all of that, I'd love to get to know you a little bit better. So yeah, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, cool. So being a CIO, working in technology for 25 years, which seems like a very long time, came to it by a slightly odd route in some ways. So I trained to be a teacher. As I finished my training to be a teacher, somebody said, here's some money to not be a teacher and do something else instead, to do technology. Ended up falling into technology. Wind forward 10 years, CIO in healthcare in the UK, CIO of the public violence healthcare system, came back to the UK and ended up as CIO of Boots. So everything Boots, not in the US, was under my sort of area of responsibility from a technology point of view. How do you sort of move to high-end beauty? How do you move to pharmacists online? And then COVID struck. How do you really start to do everything in a different way? Which was fascinating and just a brilliant opportunity. A few years at Boots though, and decided that perhaps a purpose role would be good. So went back into public sector and ended up the CIO of the Department of Work and Pensions for a couple of years, which was a lot of fun in a government's biggest department with a lot of purpose around looking after people with vulnerabilities, getting pensions out there, getting benefits out there. But after a couple of years of doing that, somebody from SEGRO said, we're looking for a CIO and do you fancy having a look? And the whole industry just fascinated me from absolute offset of just how big organizations are in size, but how small they can be in numbers of people, how much transformation is required across the industry and in each of the different organizations. So 6 months in SEGRO, absolutely loving it and trying really hard to make a difference.
The ratio of number of employees to assets under management and real estate is quite unique. And going from fast-moving consumer goods, work and pensions and public sector, and now real estate, I mean, these shifts are huge. Is digital transformation the same each time? Is there always its own unique thing?
So it's not the same each time, but I think there are similar levers that can be pulled to create engagement, which I believe is like the foundation of trying to make transformation happen. So size of organization, appetite for change, often driven by age, which can be related, I believe, to risk appetite of an organization. I think they're the things you look for rather than actually the industry. I remember being at a CIO event probably 20 years ago, and you got the CIO of Jaguar, myself, then CIO of an organization called the NIHR, a food CIO and a clothing CIO, all stood around having a glass of wine, talking about CIOs and saying, it's like that. It's a nursery rhyme where the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. CIOs are kind of a bit like that. We can do the foundational stuff that's required to do transformation because we've been doing engagement of people to get them to understand difficult and different concepts, but probably our whole career.
What one might assume is the least people-focused position in a business. But the more I suppose we engage with CIOs, the more we realize all of the transformation, problems, all of the execution, it revolves around people. Would you agree with that?
100%. If you don't have engagement with people, if you don't take people on the journey, you've got no chance to do transformation. And that's sort of we call it the license to do transformation. So not only have you got to engage people on change, but you've got to deliver to people the basics. So their laptop needs to work, the Wi-Fi needs to work, all the traditional, IT crowd things need to be very good. That earns you your license to then be a people transformation agent. So but both of those things are quite, heavily about the customer and the person that you work with.
Culture being a critical factor for the success of a transformation. How does an organization approach the issue of having a digital-first mindset and a digital-first culture?
We've sort of come up with this digital-first mindset as the thing that we want to go after. And at first it's quite alien because it's a bit of a strange language. What does digital first mean? I don't have a job that you're going to give it the robots. Why would you put mindset on the end of that phrase? And what we want it to mean is when you have a problem that you need solving, the first thing you think about is how can I as a human work with our digital colleagues and digital solutions to fix my problem. So either I have a mindset that is technology will help me fix the problems I have, whether that's engaging with customers, managing the building, looking at data, trying to predict the future, all of those things, if you have the mindset of coming to your colleagues who do digital, and then we work together to solve problems, that creates a new way of thinking, a mindset change for the organization.
Fascinating. I suppose it's an unknown what can be done with technology. My brother works in AI, and whenever I have a problem, he's a software developer, and wherever I have a problem, something I wouldn't even know could be solved. He always seems to know. Actually, you should be approaching it like this. Maybe it's his very intelligent engineer mind, but do you see that sort of benefit coming out, solving these unknown unknowns?
Yeah, I mean, the art of the possible is probably the most frequent ask that I've had in my 6 months at SEGRO from the more senior leaders. We don't know what we don't know. Can you come and spend some time with us, showing us what the future could look like? Can we spend some time with you understanding advances in technology? Not just because people want to learn, but they want to be able to take how has organization X done that, and how could it be brought to the property industry, SEGRO specifically, to solve a different problem? Because there are so many, and the pace of change, as you just mentioned there with your brother, the pace of change is phenomenal. And actually, nobody, including the technologists that work in the industry, can really keep up with that. So being able to look outside and see where the problems are and how they can be fixed is a real thing that we have to do together.
And how might you actually embed the digital first mindset, especially within teams that may have historically not been that technical?
So I think there's a lot around engagement and transparency. We've talked a little bit about engagement already, but one of the hooks that I've used the most is around creating transparency. IT, in old thinking, is a cost center that maybe is the first to be cut when times are a bit harder, and is something that is, that traditional in the basement type scenario. What we've got to do is be more transparent about the things that we're doing for the organization. If we're transparent about where we're spending our money, how we're prioritizing against what our colleagues want us to do first, second, and third, and what most importantly is the value that benefits are being released as we deploy stuff, then that engagement starts to become a virtuous circle. But also being there for colleagues as well, trying to keep it as simple as possible. I pride myself on trying to keep it simple, and yet I catch myself talking tech too often. And I think there's something about my wife's in technology as well. So you can imagine that you fall quite easily into talking too much about it and forgetting that we've got to engage everybody in our business. So constantly reminding yourself, what does this mean? What the things that you're saying? When we've recently introduced enterprise architecture as a concept across our organization, you can imagine a bunch of techies start talking about enterprise architecture, and our asset managers looking at us, why technology and architecture? We don't understand it. Like, the two phrases are completely separate. It's fascinating.
It is. It is so interesting. It's very similar to some of the founders that we work with. We can tell you're with a sort of a sales-focused founder or a product-focused founder. And a product-focused founder who loves technology is so interested in certain features, certain number of gigahertz and certain number of nodes. And an asset manager who, might be listening to them is thinking, oh, yeah.
So what is a really good phrase to use, isn't it?
Right. I suppose, when it comes to communicating value inside an organization, how do you cut through the tech for tech's sake, I guess, side of it, and actually really get to where the value is?
It's interesting. So I think there's a couple of tactics. Firstly, it is by being close to our business. So we've recently moved to a digital governance function. We call it our digital board. It's chaired by the MD of the UK business. In fact, all of our business is represented on that board. There's more people designing our future from not tech than there are tech as part of that, to make sure that it's not tech for tech's sake. It is based on a priority, a wicked problem that needs to be fixed. Mm-hmm. We mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that that's a property industry thing, though. I think the pace of tech has meant that tech for tech's sake started to be there. You see it in UK government under the previous government and the current government, lots of talk of AI. instead of the problems that AI might be able to solve. And I think that there's a danger that if you think back to talking a little bit techy for a while, when cloud computing was there, everybody raced towards the percentage of cloud computing they could have, as opposed to the benefit of cloud computing. There's a real danger that tech for tech's sake, particularly in AI, you end up looking at how many AI things can I have so I can wrap them on a leaflet, rather than what problems are we trying to solve. And that's the key, to ground it in problems.
One thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is data maturity, data standardization, plenty of use of it. With sustainability becoming a critical problem to solve for many businesses, and with data becoming more abundant but also more useful, how should organizations be approaching let's call it the data problem?
I think that the property industry is perhaps the last industry to have not worked through how to tackle the data problem, because my organization's got many, more than 100 years worth of data about things it's done with its buildings. When you consider the state of assets, they're originally called piece of grass towards the left, then they're called building site A, then they're called building B, and, even being able to refer to the same thing over multiple decades and therefore know what's happened to it, what's happening next, predict where it's going. We need to have data standards, and it would be amazing if a bit like healthcare, as an industry, we shared those data standards so that you could cut out some of the effort that each organization has to make. By agreeing how you standardize, referring to a building, referring to sustainability, measuring different elements, and there are good standards in place, aren't there? But they're not as well adopted and well seen across everything that we've got. Plus, I think many of us have stood up answers to problems that aren't enterprise-wide. And as soon as you do that, you have these point solutions. Therefore, sharing data from point solution A to B to C becomes difficult if you haven't set a data standard. We approved a data modernization strategy about 6 months ago, and we're in the throes now of really implementing it, changing how we categorize asset data, what asset data do we go after, and modernizing that. Because the beauty of all of our, the march of AI and the changes, none of that's going to work unless we've got our data into something, a better state than it is currently.
This is almost a discussion itself, but there's something you touched on, real estate being that last, large industry to really be utilizing data appropriately. There's sort of two almost camps as to why. And that there was one, which is, well, every single building is different. It's so complicated. The physical nature of it and the infrastructure nature of it takes longer. And the other is real estate has always, in a 0.5% interest environment or low interest environment since 89 or so, kind of didn't need to. Without going into this point too much, and also from your experience in other industries, why do you actually think it is? And why is it only now there seems to be that real action everywhere?
I think it's both reasons that you just said there, though, actually. So the headwinds, no matter who you are there, aren't they? And actually, we need to work out, how do we predict the future better? How do we become efficient, productive, accurate? And data gives us lessons for efficiency, productivity, and is the blood of accuracy in how we handle what we do. So being able to do it and do it now is never a true moment. I also think technology's moved on. It is easier to do some of this stuff as well. So we spent a long time with lots of paper, lots of different systems. You can now join that up. You can scan paper in, and if you read by a computer, you can use AI to join data sets up. So the technology's moved forward to make it easier to do it. The headwinds are thus that everybody needs to find that edge to give them capability and capacity. And we want to get it right for our customers, and that's the most important part.
When data is talked about, there's always those beautiful two letters, AI. I mean, there is a lot of talk. I think even 2 years ago, people were wondering, is AI going to take all of our jobs? People are now realizing, well, actually, it's potentially just shifting where the value is within an organization, so where you might not have a person working, responding to every message. Now you've got more investment in technology's use. What's your sort of view on that, on the AI, on the AI topic?
I think my view is, over the last 2 or 3 years, that there is a fear factor AI is going to take jobs. I think human-centered capability, putting a human in the loop or at the center of the loop, in fact, means that, and a colleague of mine sort of said the phrase a couple of days ago, AI is here to take the drudgery out of the work you do so you can put your heart into the work you do. That's fantastic. And yeah, it's a sort of a fall in love with moment, isn't it, in some ways? But being able to take away the mundane, the things that you don't really enjoy doing, to free you up so you can give that customer the extra mile that you want to do, or you can spend time thinking about where you invest in next, or any mass and manner of different things, even down to, you imagine you're creating a PowerPoint for a presentation. You can use AI to get 75% of the way there, and therefore you can use all of the time you used to use aligning the pages and the rest of it to be creative, rather than measuring the screen with a ruler to work out where things should be on a PowerPoint.
It's funny how that sort of theme is quite common, where, I don't know if you know that, but if you have something like Tinder, for example, where it's in some way makes people's lives kind of easier, but actually the magic of, a human interaction sort of goes up. We have AI taking away certain things, and then you have a sort of the mechanical component is gone. And now you're sort of all in the more human component. It's interesting how that...
And I think you take it away from our industry. So in my previous role, the whole reason for modernization in a job center was to make sure that work coaches could spend more time with people looking for a job. Instead of time filling in forms and looking through policy, let's make sure that that person can talk to somebody who wants to find a job and help them find a job. When you take it into a boot store, into beauty, how can you give the beauty advisor as much time with the customer, talking to them about what they want, rather than filling in forms and answering complicated questions that AI can do, or technology can do, if you take it away from AI?
Really interesting. And taking, I guess, a step back from AI and thinking about technology solutions, the sorts of things, a lot of this is built in-house, a lot of it is potentially a solution. And we were mentioning a few names earlier. I guess the question is the classic, the build or buy. How should that quite daunting problem be faced?
I think for me, we're in a place now where it's difficult to justify build, because to just touch on AI again, just vaguely, there's so much out there to be bought and applied and configured and made to work for you. And if you're going to start trying to build some of that, you're going to have to take a lot away from your organization. We are not a software company, we're a property company. And therefore, we have to first consider buy, and where we can't buy, we need to configure around the edges. And if that doesn't work, then consider what bits we need to build to fill in the gaps. But we should aim to have a much more bought estate where we're really clear on who is the expert on doing that building.
I feel sorry for your inbox after people hear that. I would say, when it comes to the many solutions thing, it's in some cases, like, I guess, a blessing, but there's also so much noise. How do you actually go about selecting the right solution?
Linking it to a problem. We've talked before about tech for tech's sake. It has to be a problem solver, and if it doesn't solve the problem that you can see, then it's nice to know about. It goes in that box of maybe one day we'll come back to it. But until we can see what the problem is it solves, and how quickly can it solve it, and how much engagement with colleagues that aren't technologists can we do on it, then it's really hard to justify diving in and getting involved.
Would you consider reverse pitch method at SEGRO?
100%. So in my previous role, we did reverse pitches with the Ministry of Justice, and we did them all across the UK. And both DWP and the Ministry of Justice met some amazing partners that have really, really changed the dial on both those very, very big government departments. So without a shadow of a doubt.
We should talk about that after this podcast. That's a cool idea. Amazing. I think we always end asking two questions. The first would be, what would be your advice to other executives in this very exciting time? And then the second, what would be your advice to entrepreneurs, technology entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I think advice to other people in the industry, other people trying to lead change, is keep it at the front of people-centered, that it has to be about engagement of people, being transparent about where you're trying to get to and showing people progress all along the way. I think that's really, really important. And that'll keep people enthused, excited, engaged, and it keeps you honest as well. It keeps you really straight on the path of where you're trying to get to. For a startup, for an entrepreneur, for somebody who wants to engage, I think it's about understanding what my problems are, that do that by talking to me. Don't think you can assume where everybody is. We've already talked about how different parts of the industry are at. So I think there's a big part in that space.
I know it's said so many times, but in listening to you, it so is all about people, even on both fronts, listening to your customer and also thinking about the culture of your organization. Rich, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Cheers.